Hey guys, and welcome back to another Warlords of Draenor changes video, and this time I'm just going to tie up some of the loose ends that we have in the patch notes. So I'll be talking about both Reforging and movement speed, and both are things that have been changed quite a bit. Well, Reforging's gone, so I guess that does suffice a pretty big change. Anyway though, the first topic is going to be movement speed. And movement speed and buffs and that kind of thing have often been a little bit confusing in-game. They haven't really stacked in a way that makes sense, and there hasn't really been much in the way of well laid out rules or anything like that. So Blizzard said that, well, they agree. They think it's badly explained and inconsistent, so they want to change that by adding in a new movement speed system and just a different way of dealing with buffs that's more transparent and has got fewer restrictions. So previously, the way that move speed modifiers worked is that it was multiplicative, I think that's how you pronounce it. Anyway, so what this would mean, right, is that if you are just running around at 100% normal speed, and then you get two 25% movement speed buffs, it would do 1.25 times 1.25, which equals 1.56, or 156% movement speed. Now that, yes, that makes sense from a multiplication standpoint, but if you think about it, when if you're given two 25% movement speed buffs, then you would think, naturally, that would add up to a movement speed increase of 50%. Well, they're actually changing it so that is the case. They're going to make it so the move speed bonuses are additive, so your two 25% will equal a 50% overall buff. This makes a lot more sense in my opinion. Another thing that they are doing is clarifying the logic which governs which bonuses stack. So if a bonus is a passive self-only bonus, then it's going to stack additively with everything. Now that makes a lot of sense. So say if you're a feral cat druid, well, obviously what's going to happen is you get your 10 or 20% movement speed buff from that, but any other buffs you get, well, they're all going to stack additively, because that just makes a lot of sense, because these passive self-only buffs, if you think about it, all they're really doing is they're just increasing your base movement speed anyway, so that makes sense. However, if a buff is temporary or applies to other players, then it's considered exclusive and your character will only gain benefit from the single largest buff. So, well, what that means is that say you have two large move speed buffs put on you. Now, I'm just going to use the example of a Worgen Druid. If you don't know, Worgen have got an ability called Dark Flight, which increases their movement speed, I think, by 40%. And then Druids have got one called Dash, which also increases their movement speed. Now, these were both temporary, self-only buffs, but they still count as being temporary. So, in the new Warlords of Draenor system, if you had both of these active at the same time, then the game will only take into account the single largest one of those two buffs. And then, when Dark Flight falls off, the game will say, well, okay, Dark Flight is gone, but that other buff is still there, so you'll drop down to your next fastest buff. So that's a little bit interesting. And they've also removed the restriction which would prevent you from, putting on two temporary buffs at the same time. Currently, if you're a druid and you have Dark Flight turned on, you can't turn on Dash. Well, in Warlords, you will be able to, and it'll just take into account the one with the greatest magnitude. That's interesting. That actually gives people a little bit more freedom to screw themselves over in terms of their overall effectiveness, because you could stack two of these buffs and only really gain the benefit from one. So it's a little bit, I guess, kind of bizarre the way they've done that, but I can see why they want to give you the flexibility, but still I don't really think that's needed. However, obviously the biggest change is just by making all of this additive instead of multiplicative, and yeah, just makes a lot more sense, it's more readable, and that's overall a very good thing. Now then, to tie everything up, I'm just going to mention what they said about Reforging. I was going to leave this into Warcraft Daily for tomorrow or something like that, but let's just get it all done with. So, they said that the original intent behind the whole Reforging system was to give people a way to customize their gear. But in practice, it didn't really offer much in the way of true choice, because what people would do is they try to optimize every single piece of gear, and well, obviously just use Ask Mr. Robot or Reforge Lite or some sort of guide or something like that, which has already determined the optimal choice and done all the maths. It basically added another step in the list of things that you had to do to your new bit of raid loot before it was actually ready to be used, so it kind of reduced the joy of getting a new upgrade, it turned it into a chore. I think that's absolutely true. So right now what's going to happen is that with Reforging being gone, if an upgrade drops and it's better, then the chances of you just being able to equip it with not that much fuss, a lot higher. So yeah, what they've done is they've just removed Reforging on any NPCs from the game, and then any existing items which have been reforged are going to be returned to their original state. And then, I guess just one last thing to mention is the Yak mount. If you don't know, there's a Yak mount. It costs, I think, like 80,000 gold, and it has a Reforge vendor on it, and that was kind of useful to a lot of people. Of course, with Reforge vendors being removed from the game, that's going to be a little bit different now. I think what Blizzard are planning on doing is replacing it with the transmog guy. So that's useful, but it's certainly not as useful, though. I think keeping Reforging in for the sake of a few people with a nice mount is probably not the best overall game decision to make. Anyway, that's been it for this video. That's the last of the changes talked about. Hopefully this week, Blizzard release some blogs and things like that to just go into a little bit more detail about some things. I'm pretty sure there's a Garrison blog coming up, and I cannot wait to see some more in-depth information about that. But anyway, yes, that is it for the end of the most recent bout of Warlords of Draenor news. From what I've seen over Twitter, a few people are still finding some models and dredging them up from the current alpha build, so I'm going to have a little bit of a look at that tomorrow, assuming any new models have been found or looked at. But yep, that's it for me now. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.